everyone. Welcome to today's Scale Up Series session. My name is Emily Springer. I'm a graduate learning specialist in the Graduate Studies Support Center. And so incredibly grateful to have one of our very own academic coaches, Dr. Brianna Nicholson, joining us today. She is going to be going over the highly anticipated NVivo basics. So we hope you gain some knowledge from today's session and that you're able to use this tool and put it in your tool belt as you continue in your dissertation research journey. A couple of brief housekeeping items. We definitely want you to participate in the chat, ask questions through the Q&A function. I will note we are in a meeting format, and so it is best to remain muted unless you are called upon. Brief item, we are recording as usual. I will send a copy of this presentation to everyone who's registered. I will post it into our Graduate Studies Support Center as well too. And I think that about does my housekeeping items, Dr. Nicholson. I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to you. If you have any questions, please find me in the chat and I can help you out if you need any assistance with anything.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Emily. This is a wonderful opportunity for me. I bring you greetings not only from the Academic Success Center, I also bring you greetings from now warm Ohio, but ask me again in a couple of hours. We'll see if it changes to snow or some other weather format. So greetings to everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. So my hope is to talk with you a little bit about NVivo basics and understanding that this really gives you an opportunity for a strong start to your qualitative data analysis. We're going to have a couple of objectives today. We're going to make sure that you understand what NVivo is, give you some appropriate uses for NVivo. We're going to start strong with some exemplars of coding and categorizing and creating themes in NVivo, just getting yourself familiar with NVivo, because that is really, I would argue, 60% of the battle with NVivo is that we're just not familiar with it. We think it's a program, it's a software program, and we're a little scared or mystified by it. And so I hope to demystify NVivo here today and also give you some strategies that you can use for your own practice, for your own familiarity and getting comfortable with using NVivo. And I think you'll find it very helpful as you progress through your qualitative analysis. So what is NVivo? NVivo is qualitative research software. It allows us to import data from various sources, Word, PDF, notes, whatever the Mac version of Word is. It allows you to import those files, and it allows you to easily query your data, search your data, sort, and organize your data. It is an assistant, so I cannot stress this enough. Oftentimes, especially in this time of AI and artificial intelligence, we think that NVivo is going to actually code for us, and that is not the case. NVivo is an assistant in your data analysis process. It allows you to free up some of that busy work that you would do organizing and managing your data so you can focus on the task at hand, which is actually analyzing and coding your data. NVivo also supports the research of textual data, rich data, multimedia data, all non-numerical. So NVivo, unfortunately, doesn't calculate averages, give you stats, or give you the mean, median, or mode of anything. But it definitely supports the research and the deep dive into textual data. And by multimedia data, I'm even talking about photos and videos. Yes, if you are using analyzing photos, videos as part of your data artifacts, NVivo can assist with that examination as well. NVivo allows us to easily identify trends at the push of a button. We can sort our data, cross-examine between two data sources, and it makes it really easy to do the deep dive of the data that some of you are going to be doing for your dissertation. But again, as I cannot stress enough, your expertise is still key. The codes, the organization, and mapping of what goes into NVivo is created by you. You are the expert here. NVivo is simply there to help. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about some appropriate uses for NVivo. NVivo is an assistant, again, in the coding of your data. And by coding of the data, I mean attaching that meaning, that interpretation, that description of your data segment, attaching that in NVivo. Which allows us to not only store it, but also to remember where we have coded our data. So it really helps us in the process of analysis of our data, the gathering of our data, the putting our data together, especially when we're collecting multiple data sources. This can be quite a tricky process. And so NVivo allows us to do that quite easily. Exploration of our data can happen. We can peruse our data, become familiar with our data in NVivo. Managing large data sets. Many researchers are surprised at how much data is collected and how much data comes about from qualitative study. On average, if you have a 45-minute to an hour interview, it's not unusual to have a 7, 8, 9, 10-page transcript, and that's just one interview. So think about multiplying that by the number of participants you have. That can be quite a bit of data. So managing that large data set is important. Organizing those data sets are important as well, and NVivo is an assistant with that. We can also add details and descriptions to our data very easily. And because NVivo is so robust and helpful in our analysis process, we can easily name our codes, rename our codes if need be, and move them around, move where we've placed codes if need be. So NVivo really helps us with a process that was quite tedious if we're coding by hand. I remember I had a piece of paper, a highlighter, and an ink pen. So you can imagine if I changed my mind about a code, how difficult it would be to change that code across all of my pieces of paper. And so NVivo allows us kind of a one-stop shop to do that. There are several functions that I want to make you aware of in NVivo that are sometimes mistaken for coding, but they are not. NVivo does not code data with the way that we need to code it for meaning, interpretation, or description. There is a word frequency button in NVivo that allows us to count how many times a word appears. Sometimes that is mistaken for coding. It is not. It is word counting. It is the frequency of a word that appears in the document. It can be helpful to highlight any words that may emerge that maybe the participants used, but it is not coding. Also, there is a button, it can be a little confusing, it's actually called auto code. But what it does is it identifies linguistic segments in your data. So basically noun verb pairings, and it will put those into a list for you. Again, it's helpful to identify maybe some outlier information that pops up, but we don't want to confuse it with coding. The coding comes from you. I cannot stress how important you are to the process of analysis. When we do engage with NVivo, we definitely want to begin with the end in mind. We want to think about how many data sources do we have? And by data sources, I mean, did we collect interviews from our participants? Are we conducting a focus group? Do we have an open-ended questionnaire? Are we looking at some artifact data? Maybe a photo or a video. We want to think about how many data sources that we have and where they're coming from so that we can think about how we might want to organize NVivo appropriately. Today, we'll be looking at a transcript and data that might be collected through an open-ended questionnaire. But there are other sources that can be imported into NVivo as well. And you just want to be very mindful of all of the different sources of data that you might be navigating as part of your study. You want to establish a plan. Now, hopefully this plan was part of your chapter 3 or your section 1, depending on what you're completing. But you at least want to think about a plan to approach the data in NVivo. So you want to make sure that you're very clearly importing your data correctly and appropriately. One of the key things that I often share with learners is each of your data files, each of your data sets should be their own individual files. So if you conducted 10 interviews, you should have 10 files. We do not want all of your participants' files to be in one document. That will not allow us to see the nuances between your participants and within each participant. So we want to make sure that each of your files is individually saved and named. Also, you want to make sure that your data is clean and ready for analysis. That means that if you have transcribed it yourself, you've reread it to make sure that it's accurate. If someone else transcribed it, you've reread it to make sure that it's accurate. And definitely, if we've used some computer program to try to transcribe our data, that we have double checked that work. Also, if you've indicated that you would do any sort of member checking or any sort of touch point with your participants in terms of sending them the file back, usually this is something that you will note or have noted in chapter 3 or section 1. You want to make sure that that's that has been done as well. You then want to explore and familiarize yourself with the data. Again, this can be done in NVivo. NVivo is a great place to just kind of read through your data and get closer and more familiar with the data. Some helpful tips is to maybe run a couple of queries to look for important words, if that is going to be helpful for you. Things that participants said that might be helpful. You can also memo. What is helpful about memoing is you can kind of jot down any emotions or any thoughts that you're having as you are reading through and becoming familiar with the data. Then you can really engage effectively with the coding process in NVivo. And then reflect on those codes. Rarely do we get it right the first time. I know I've probably had about 3 or 4 iterations of a code before I settled on one. We want to make sure that codes are mutually exclusive, meaning that they're not so close in meaning that we can't really distinguish, if we have mad and angry. Well, I know they're 2 different words, but is their meaning so distinct that it warrants the use of the 2 words? And we want to make sure that we're comfortable and confident with our codes and our word choices. And then practice the basics. We don't just hop on a bike and say, you know what, I'm going to do a cross-country bike race the first time we've ridden a bike. No, it takes practice, it takes some diligence on our part, and that's what we want to be mindful of in NVivo. So I'm going to hop into NVivo here live. As we look at NVivo, we see that it's quite clear, it's quite clean. We are very, NVivo is very user-friendly. And again, it's not something to be scared of or nervous about. You really, I guess you can break anything, but if you think you're going to break NVivo, it's going to be very hard for you to break. NVivo has very robust functions in that it asks you if you are going to save, if you want to save your information. So you can always tell it no and then back up and change your mind about something. And so that could be very much a help to you in knowing that it's going to be something you can't break.
Dr. Nicholson?
Yes.
Would it be okay? I have about 3 questions that I feel like would be
please.
perfect to ask right now before we
Certainly.
hop forward. Okay, great.
Yes.
Someone had asked, I've been wondering if NVivo is required for qualitative research, or can I use any other kind of tool that helps with qualitative research?
Well, NVivo is what is offered through the university. So when I talk about establishing this plan, this is establishing the plan that's best for you. So there are other tools out there. I know of another that I have used in the past called MaxQDA. MaxQDA is a little bit more techy than I'm comfortable with, so I prefer NVivo, but you may prefer that other option. Also, there's the good old standby hand coding. So, that is an option as well. So NVivo, of course, is something you want to check with your chair. Some chairs do prefer and make that known that you use this software. But to my understanding, it's not a requirement from the university. It's here as an option for you, but there are other methods and means you can use.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholson. And it is the software provided as an NU student for qualitative research. I know someone asked in the chat, how do they access NVivo? I will go ahead and post a link, but you can find that in your university service module and then through the Academic Success Center. So I will post that in there. I have had several people ask if they can record the session. I will post I will send this to everyone who's registered. So rest assured, you will get a copy. And then 2 more questions for you, Dr. Nicholson. Does it help in the data Arthur, hold on one second. Does it help in the data collection in the field? Do we need to expand on that, or can you address that?
No, I can address that. So NVivo has no collection mechanism. So in the field, if you're talking about recording, it really doesn't help with that. The one feature that if you feel like carrying your computer around, once you have your transcription, and let's say you are going to want to just memo, or you're observing the person that you just interviewed, you can definitely keep track of some memos in NVivo, but in that sense, it might make more sense and be less distracting for both you and your participant to jot down those memos in a separate feature and then come back to NVivo later and import those or type those in. But there's nothing really that captures data live from the field.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholson. We'll pause there, and then we'll come back to some of these other questions at a later time when you're ready to take a break.
Okay. All right. So let's pull up NVivo itself. So NVivo, as I mentioned, is very kind of user-friendly. We all will interact with NVivo at the import, using the import button. This is our first point of interaction because we can't analyze what's not there. So we have to import our data into NVivo. There's several options for importing our data. Today, I'm going to talk specifically about the file option that allows us to pull in what the majority of you will have in terms of interviews, focus groups, observations, most archival data. It's going to come to you in the form of text files, PDFs, Word documents, that sort of things, even your photos and videos. And those pieces of information will get imported through the File tab. I'm also going to show you survey data. Now, don't let the survey term fool you. It's not, we're not doing a mixed methods. It's not quantitative that we're data that we're pulling in. What we're pulling in the survey data is anything that's collected in a uniform format. So for example, if I ask participants an open-ended question, I would anticipate that when they answer that question, they're all answering that same question. So for example, if I have at a column, what is your address? And as I look down that information and they all gave me their address, that all represents the address. And so we pull that kind of standardized information in using the survey function. Now you'll pull in information that could be demographic. You may collect that information along with your open-ended questions. That's fine. And we'll kind of walk through that here. This is probably the easiest part of the process. So I'm going to click my File tab. And it's going to bring up my wherever we save our files. So for example, here I already have a transcript sample. I'm going to double click. It's going to ask me if I want to import. I'm going to import that file. And it takes it a minute, but it's loading. This is where it gives you an opportunity to change that file name. So one of the things I talked about earlier was that each of your interview files should be its own document, its own file. It's also equally important and helpful for you to make sure that you've named the file, whatever you are going to call your participants in Chapter 4. So this means if I'm going to use a pseudonym for my participant, I probably want to name this file Joe underscore interview, if that's their fake name, their pseudonym. If I'm going to call the participant 1 or participant 2 or P1, P2 or respondent 1, whatever you're going to call that participant, you want to make sure that your file name is named that as well. That will just facilitate the taking of the data out of NVivo later. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to just call my participant participant 1. And I'm going to just go ahead and do underscore interview. And then I'm going to click OK. As you can see, it changed the file name to participant 1 interview. And that's what's going to help me distinguish all of my data points in NVivo once I actually get in here and start coding. I'm going to go back to my import tab. And this time I'm going to click on my survey tab. Again, my survey doesn't mean that I'm pulling in quantitative data. It just means that I'm using something or I'm collecting something that is a little more standardized in its format. We all know that we can often collect demographic data, sometime even identify our participants' eligibility for our studies through Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey, if that's the route that you're going. And so those items are available here. You can connect right to Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey right here in NVivo, as long as you have a login and a password for those two pages. I'm going to pull in an Excel document. This is going to be an Excel document. It's a fake Excel document that I created that has some fake participant data. Now, what's different about pulling in an Excel document is, of course, we know that Excel stores data in rows and columns. So you just want to make sure that your rows and columns are uniform. And that just means that, if you're going to have the questions running along the top, that's consistent. If you're going to have them running along the side, that's consistent as well. So NVivo imports this information through what is called a survey wizard. It reminds us of a couple of things. First, it reminds us that NVivo is automatically going to store each row of our data that we pull in as a case. A case is just a fancy word for a folder or a bucket of information. A case does not automatically mean case study. So a case is really a container of information for a unique participant in your study. So basically, every participant is going to have a folder. It also reminds you that some of your data could be closed-ended, some of it could be open-ended. Closed-ended data are descriptive information. They are not coded. For example, I'm not going to code someone's race. I'm not going to code someone's ethnicity or gender. I probably wouldn't even code their address. Why? Because when I ask someone what their address is, they're not giving me a perception of their address. They're telling me what their address is. So I don't need to code it. I may just be collecting that so I know what geographic area they're from. So I'm going to view that as closed-ended data. I'm going to leave anything open-ended as any data that my participants could openly share their thoughts, feelings, beliefs, understandings, anything that all of the training wheels are off. They can answer in any way they see fit. That's what's going to constitute an open-ended question. So I'm going to just click next. Again, all of these are reminders, and these hyperlinks actually give you little definitions. So if you get confused, you get to this point, you forget what these items mean, you can just click on these little hyperlinks and they'll pop up definitions for you. I'm going to click next. It pulls in my information. The first thing it asks me is how many rows constitute my question headers. So I have one row. You might have more than one. That's fine. But I just have one row of headers. That's name, age, gender, rank, or my open-ended question. Yes, Emily.
Yes, so sorry, Dr. Nicholson.
No, that's fine.
But I've had this question come up a couple of times through different ways. Is there any reason why it says hello?
I don't know.
Computer assistant. Yeah.
Somebody looked like they were typing that, and I've tried to click it and get rid of it. I saw a name pop up, and then I saw somebody start to type, and then it stayed there. So I'm not sure what I did.
That's okay. Is there any way we can move the survey step 2 box over a little bit to the right so that it's not?
Sorry about that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, while I was talking, I was trying to delete that. I don't know if the person that actually typed it can delete it, because I saw someone's name pop up and then I saw the words pop up. I think maybe there's a pencil or an annotate, but I'll keep trying to get rid of it. So I'm sorry about that.
Not a worries.
But the survey wizard pops up, and all of the information that was in my Excel document is here. I have my participant name, I have their age, their gender, their rank, and then I have an open-ended question that I asked the participant. I don't have any dates, so I'll leave this box alone. I'm going to click next. This just asks you where you'd like to save the file. I don't mess with this. I let NVivo save wherever it saves all the files on my computer, but you may have a different choice. You may have a memory stick or an external drive that you save to. I'm also going to select whatever the unique ID is for my participants. So in this case, my participant names are the unique ID. That is how it differentiates between the different participants. You would select whatever is your unique identifier for your study. And I'm just going to click next. This is where it's important to know those differences between the open and the closed-ended questions. This is going to pop up and ask you what you would like to import into NVivo. So I'm going to leave my name, that's closed-ended, my participants' names, their age, their gender, and their rank. You can also have an option to not import something. If you get to a point where you're like, I really don't need their age, I collected that for descriptive purposes, and I don't need their gender, but I want to keep their rank, we'll leave that. And then the open-ended question is the last item. So I'm going to click that. When I asked, how can we improve our study? That's an open-ended question. They were able to type in their own thoughts. And then I'm going to click finish. And it's pulling that information in. Once I click close, we'll see our sample participants here. This is actually going to open, and you'll see that it pulled in, obviously, my participants' names. It also pulled in, let me see if I can scoot this over a little bit. There we go. It pulled in my participants' names, it pulled in the rank, and then here's my open-ended questions. You'll also notice, I can't click any of these. Wonder why that is. Because they're the closed-ended data. I can't code them, I cannot manipulate them. And so anything that I have added as closed-ended data simply becomes something that I can sort by, but it's nothing that I can manipulate or code by. But here, my open-ended question, this is where I get information that I can actually start to analyze. These are my participants' thoughts, feelings, beliefs on how the study can be improved. And so this is information that I would actually walk through and start coding. I'm going to show you how to code here, but don't worry, we will hop into our sample transcript as well. So for example, we have this participant that said fewer questions. So how we can improve the study, they feel fewer questions is warranted. Now, of course, this is a short answer, but this has meaning. That participant wants to see wants less work as it relates to the study. So I might highlight the statement. You're going to highlight everything that you're going to code, which is basically the select feature. Just like you do in Word and other programs, you're going to select the information. There's two ways to create a code. The easiest way from here is to actually right click or function click if you're on a Mac, and a box will pop up. The top section of the box says code selection. I'm going to click on that code selection, and I'm going to come and create a new code. It's a little flipped. Usually we're used to reading from left to right. Unfortunately, we need to be reading from right to left in this sense. So whenever I want to create a new code, I'm going to come over here to the left, click where it says top level code, and I'm going to just type in what I kind of said before, which was less work. And I'm going to come down here and click my blue button that says code selection to new code. That information has been coded. I'm going to do that again so that you see how that's done. More incentives. I'm going to maybe code that as recognition. So I'm going to highlight the participant's words. Again, I'm going to right click. I'm going to click code selection, which again is the top option in this drop-down box. I'm going to create a new top level code. So I'm going to click this box and I'm going to just type in recognition. And then I'm going to click code selection to new code. I'm going to say this third one, but I'm going to show you the other way to create a code. I'm still going to select my term, the terminology that the participant said. But this time I'm going to come up to home. I'm going to come down to where it says code and click code selection. Again, it's the first option available. The same box pops up. So whether you do the right click and select from the drop down box, or you go up to home and select code selection, it takes you to the same place. This is not a different set of codes. It's the same information. NVivo just helps you out by giving you a couple of different ways to do something. I'm going to click my top level code again, and I'm just going to call this compensation. And I'm making these up as I go. And I'm going to click code selection to new code. So now we have a few codes under our belt. We're going to imagine that we've completed coding our open-ended questionnaire. And now it is time to code our transcript. Remember, I brought in our transcript. It's participant 1 interview. I've saved it. I'm going to go ahead and open it. NVivo sometimes runs a little slow, but this is my sample transcript. Anytime that you do have a transcript that you use, you want to make sure that that transcript is transcribed verbatim. So you want to, if someone offers to transcribe and capture kind of the essence of what the participant said, no, you want the full transcript, the full verbatim discussion that you had with that participant. You also want the different information to be clearly marked. So as you can see here, I have interviewer, I have my participant, which is teacher 1, interviewer, their next response, and so on. So you just want that information to be clearly visible and recognizable for you as the researcher. I'm going to just kind of walk through how I would code a transcript. Again, I'm not going to code myself as the interviewer because I hopefully know what I said. I'm going to code my participants' information. I'm also going to use what is called a line-by-line coding. That means I'm going to look at each sentence and code for meaning, understanding, definition, description in that sentence. So let's get started with this shorter phrase up here. So as an interviewer, I asked, how do children in your classroom oppress each other? Well, they call each other names. So I would grab that sentence. I would right click. I'm just going to do the right click because it's the quickest way to code for the sake of time. Again, code selection is my top option. I'm going to click create a new code. And I'm going to call this one name calling. I'm going to click code selection to new code. I'm going to come down to this next sentence, this next statement that the teacher said. Oh, we've got a little girl in here. She looks different and she acts different. So they'll make up some name that they'll call her. I'm going to maybe grab this sentence and maybe I'll call this difference or different. And so I'm going to again highlight my sentence. I'm going to right click. I'm going to click code selection. I'm going to click create new top level code, and I'm going to call this different. Now, up until this point, I have created all new codes. You will hopefully get to a point where your codes will start to repeat. You'll see the same discussion happening either within your participant responses or across your participant responses. So I'm going to, just for the sake of example, come down to this next sentence. And I'm going to call this different as well. I'm going to highlight it just like I did before. I'm going to right click it. I'm going to click code selection. But this time I'm not going to create a new code. This code is different as well. I know that I've already created a code called different. So I'm going to come over here to the code. I'm going to click in the box so that it's selected. And then I'm going to code this selection to different. I do not want to create a new code. NVivo is many things, it's great, but it will let you create multiple codes that are the same. So you have to watch the codes that you're creating. You want to make sure that you are putting information into mutually exclusive buckets so that you don't have things that are so similar that they really mean the same thing. I know that I've coded a few items here, so I'm going to take us out of this interview for now, especially since I know this is being recorded. You can go back and look at that process. I want us to take a look at our codes themselves. And unfortunately, I still haven't figured out how to delete that. I apologize. But here we have our codes that we've created. Eureka, in less than 10 minutes, we have 5 codes. This is excellent. This is what we want to see. So I have compensation, I have different, I have less work, I have name calling, and I have recognition as my codes. This is a time where you can take a look at these codes, reflect on these codes, see if these codes are accurate reflections of your participant responses. And to do that, I need to double click on my code to have that response. So when I double click on the name of the code, what's going to populate to the right is the actual information that I coded. The reason that I told you to name the file, what you're going to call the participant in chapter 4, is because this actually tells me where that information is coded. So here is where I coded, well, they call each other names. And this came from participant 1. If we had more participants, you would see this information duplicated underneath. You would know exactly where each of your codes is found and what each participant said. So this makes it very easy to identify quotes that you may want to use in the body of your document. I'm also going to briefly show you how to categorize or create themes. We're not going to do it so much for meaning today, because that's something that comes down the pipe a little bit more, but I want you to at least know the process of how to do it, because the way we create categories and themes in NVivo is the same. There is no theme button, there is no category button in NVivo. So we need to be creative in how we create our categories and themes. And so I'm going to show you how to create the buckets that may be helpful for you as you continue and complete your coding process. I'm going to make sure that I click in the white space so that none of my codes are highlighted. I do not want any of my codes selected. If I click on one, it's selected. I want to make sure I click in the white space so that nothing is chosen. I'm going to come up to the top and click create. I'm going to come to down to code. You'll notice that I did not go home to create this code. This is because I am not attaching data to this code. I am creating a bucket that will become either my category or my theme. So I'm going to type category, and I'm going to call this category just test session, just for the purposes of demonstration. For a category, it's very important that we understand why we categorized information. So in my box here that says description, I'm going to make sure that I type in the why. What makes this a category? Why am I creating this particular category? Is it because these are all emotions that participants experience? Is this because these are all places participants have been? What is the creation of this category and what is it for? And then I click OK. The great thing about NVivo is that it alphabetizes your list. So you'll see that category popped up here. So I have test session as my category, and I can start to think about the different codes that would bundle underneath that. Creating a theme is the exact same way. I'm going to come into my white space to make sure that nothing is selected. I'm going to come up to the top and click create. I'm going to create my code, but this time I'm going to call it a theme. And this is going to be my overarching theme. And the same premise in my description box, I'm going to tell myself, or in my case, remind myself when I come back here later, why I am naming this theme. What is the definition of this theme? What research question do I think it answers? So I might come in and put an RQ1 or whatever research question I think it answers, and then I'm going to put in my information about why this theme answers or addresses that research question. And then I'm going to click OK. Again, my lists in NVivo actually alphabetized. So you'll see that my theme came through here at the bottom. You'll also notice that they are not attached to any files. That is why I come up to create categories and themes, because they are not connected to raw data. Your codes are what are connected to the raw data. Your categories bundle codes, and your themes pull together your categories in ways that answer or address these research questions. I'm going to briefly go back to the PowerPoint, and then Emily, if we do have any questions, we can hopefully get to some of those. Now, I know this was a lot, and we didn't get into specifics, especially once we got to the category and theme part. But that is because that part of the process is so specific and nuanced based on your study. So I want to offer you some guidelines and guidance on seeking additional support. Please visit the Academic Success Center. We have several options to support you as you start and complete your analysis. You are not in this alone. We are here to assist. We have an NVivo fundamentals group session. We have a next steps group session. These are smaller sessions, so this platform is great. It's at a different time of day. I'm so happy you were able to join. The group sessions tend to be small. And if you miss out, I think it's 7 participants. And if you're not one of those 7, you may have to wait until the next week. So that is an option for you. We also have writing qualitative analysis group sessions. We have NVivo power hours on Sundays. We also have individual sessions that are available with myself and another coach that's very comfortable with NVivo. And then oftentimes both of us are in chat. So if you have a quick question, I'm either myself or the other coach, who's Dr. Mitra, can answer your questions about NVivo. And something that I didn't put on here that we have as well are qualitative query power hour sessions that actually run this afternoon. And so those are sessions that you can just drop in at any time, ask your questions, and then leave when they're answered, or just hang around or stick around for accountability and support, just for some dedicated writing time. So that is the crux of my presentation, Emily. So any questions or anything else that you think I should cover?
Oh, we certainly have questions, Dr. Nicholson. I would like to thank you so much. I'm so sorry. Our Zoom must have done an update, so I had to take a little bit of time trying to figure out how to delete the annotation, but it was a good learning experience. So, and along with that, I have learned a lot with NVivo. There was a piece that you had mentioned about the theme piece. It was what you covered right before you transferred right to this slide right here. Could you repeat it for our audience members? The question is, how are themes categories different? You started talking about themes,
yes.
categories.
Yes.
Could you say that statement one more time?
Certainly. So we almost want to think of these things as a funnel. We want to think of our codes as building blocks to categories, and categories as supports for our themes. So codes are the most connected part to your data. Codes are attached to your raw data. Oftentimes we will categorize groups of codes. So for example, if someone says mad, angry, sad, frustrated, we might categorize those codes as emotions, felt by teachers, or whatever the case may be. So that category is an umbrella over like codes. By the time we get to theme creation, themes are syntheses of our categories that actually answer or address our research questions. So we may have a category of emotions felt by teachers, and we may have a category of strategies teachers use for classroom management. But our theme that answers and addresses our research question might be teachers are guided by their emotions when selecting strategies that impact their classrooms. And so that theme is a synthesis of multiple categories that come together.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson. We appreciate that. Couple of questions in the Q&A. I'm just going to go down in the Q&A. I know that several people put questions in the chat, but I'm going to start with the Q&A first. And if time permits, I will do my best to address what was in the chat. Can you upload a .mov file to NVivo?
Yes, that's going to be that audio or video piece that you can import. Now, I will say this: you can import it, but coding video files is not for the faint of heart. So if your video file is not a requirement of your analysis. So for example, if you're not looking for body movement and cues and visual cues from your participant, you really only need the transcript. But again, I preface that with, if you're looking at, kinesiology or something and you're looking at body movement, then of course you need the video. But if that's not part of your analysis, then I would just encourage you to use the transcript itself. There is depending on your Wi-Fi strength, video files take longer to process in NVivo and import. So just be prepared for that time constraint as well.
Thank you so much. We talked about using different software for the qualitative analysis. Would it be redundant to use, for example, DDoS and NVivo in the same study, or?
I would see it as redundant because they're both essentially helping you to organize your thoughts. And so it's really just the package they come in. So I would view it as redundant. The thing that I would possibly not view as redundant is using maybe hand coding and then a software package or program. So if you are doing a couple of rounds of review, and I also will preface this to say, when I go through this interview, I'm not going through this interview once. Typically, we go through our data more than once. So hand coding, though, really gets us familiar with the data in a different way. And so that's probably the only juxtaposition that I wouldn't view as redundant. If you're using multiple software programs, I would probably view those as redundant because ultimately they're doing the same thing.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson. Next question. Does the logic of making each interview transcript its own separate file apply to files that are exported from SurveyMonkey?
No. So files exported from SurveyMonkey, NVivo views as surveys. So they will be pulled in via that separate platform that I showed you that pulls them in that format that almost looked like an Excel sheet. So it's going to pull them in that way. And SurveyMonkey and I only know about SurveyMonkey, but I believe Qualtrics does this too. It gives each participant an identifier, a unique identifier. It tells where they're logging in from, and it gives them a unique number, which that is the rationale behind importing your interview file separately. If I code one file that has all of my participant responses to NVivo, it's going to look like I have one grouping of codes. It's not going to tell me that 7 of my participants said this. It's going to say, well, all of your one participant said this, because it views the file as one participant. So the reason we separate the files is so that we know, did all of my participants say this item? Did 2 of them? 1 of them? We want to see that distinction and that differentiation. And that already happens in the information that we pull in from Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey.
Thank you so much for that. In order to transcribe, do I need audio to record the participant during the interview? What's your recommendation?
Yes. So to transcribe, I've had learners in the past try to, I don't even know what you call it, note take during an interview. You really lose the being present with the participant doing that, because you're busy trying to take notes. So of course, always check with your chair, but I'm a big proponent of recording the interview. Now that I think we're cleared to do things in person, you want to make sure you have a tape recorder, or your phone is a great recorder. You can listen back. The great thing about recording the file is that there's so many software programs, and of course I can't think off the top of my head what they are, but they will slow down the audio if you're transcribing yourself. So they'll take what might have been, at a 3/8 pace and take it down to a 1/8 pace, so it's slow enough for you to type it. So there's programs that do that. Of course, there are captioning services, but your major programs like Zoom and things like that caption things. I think you can do things in Word online and things like that. So there's lots of options to transcribe, but they all come down to having an audio file to work from.
Absolutely. And Dr. Nicholson, of course, we want to be able to be representing our participants' responses to the most degree of accuracy that we
Mm-hmm.
can ensure. So yeah, absolutely. I would recommend that too. Okay. Jessica, I'm not sure. I might need you to expand on this a little bit. I'm going to ask Dr. Nicholson, and then she might be able to address this piece in its entirety. But let's say the participant went on a tangent. Do we need to create a code around that, I guess?
Your chair may be of a different school of thought. So of course check with your chair. I code that information anyway, just to make sure that I bundle my outliers. Those outliers have meaning, and so that may be something that you talk about in your directions for future study. So that person may have gone on a tangent, and it might be just that person. But then if 3 or 4 of them went off on the same tangent, then maybe that's an opportunity for you to say in your chapter 5 or your section 3 that, hey, this was not something raised that actually answered or addressed these specific research questions, but could be a direction for future inquiry or study.
Okay, here's another question. Can you merge codes upon realizing you've created 2 of the same codes?
You sure can. There is a process for that. It's a little involved, so I would recommend either hopping into an NVivo Power Hour session for that, or scheduling an individual session to work with either myself or Dr. Mitra or one of our other coaches to do that, but you definitely can. You want to be certain that because you cannot unmerge. So you want to be certain that you want to make that move. And what I recommend is what I kind of showed you when you double click the code and you read what you actually coded. Make sure that you are confident that all of those codes need to be merged, that those statements are saying the same thing. Sometimes if you need to merge at the code level, that's fine. Sometimes we need to break apart a code. We come and say, ooh, that's really not what I thought it was. It's actually something else. So then we take the code off, uncode, and then recode it as something else. So really make sure that merging is what you mean to do, and not, create a new code, uncode it, and then attach it to a new code.
So basically, if you think you have that, please contact Dr. Nicholson.
Yes. Because it removes the original file path. So you cannot break apart, once you merge, you cannot break apart the file path for the individual codes, because it changed them in all of the source documents. So you want to be certain that that's what you want to do.
And I actually see that later on down in the Q&A. Can you merge codes upon realizing you've created 2 of the same code? So I'm glad we've addressed that. I'm going to take one more question, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's session. Someone had mentioned into bubble charting data. Does that have anything to do with NVivo, and how is that done?
Bubble charting, do you mean depicting the data like a word map?
That's how I'm picturing it.
Okay.
But
yeah, if you're talking about a word map, NVivo does have features where you can export some simple level word maps. Now, it does not separate them out. For example, if you wanted to track, the code to the category to the theme, it would do it at that level. But then if you wanted to look at it by participant or by groups of participants, it doesn't have that level of sophistication. Usually those kind of word maps are best created maybe in Word itself, using the feature in the different chart and graph creation features in Word itself. But there are some simple features that are available in NVivo, but again, they're going to be at the very granular level. It'll show you the development from code category to theme in a bubble chart or a code progression, but it won't show you, if I want to see all of my private school teachers versus my public school teachers, it won't show you that level of detail.
Dr. Nicholson, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to come to our Skill Up series and to give us a foundational piece for NVivo for us to move into our qualitative analysis for our data here. And I just want to thank all of our participants. There was a lot of people on the call. You took a lot of questions, Dr. Nicholson, so we're super grateful for that. I will again send this recording to everyone who's registered. And then, as Dr. Nicholson has stated, if there's further questions that have come up and you have more inquiry into NVivo, please utilize the services in the Academic Success Center, the coaches, the group sessions, the asynchronous sessions, and even just going to the chat and starting a conversation there as well too. Because we will get back to it, and if we don't have an answer, we will find out the answer and then try to support our students so you can be more successful in your journey. I would like to ask the participants, if you are so inclined, to complete the survey at the end of the session. Please let us know, like, what else would you like to see in our Skill Up series so you can be more successful in your academic endeavors. And I think that about is going to be our closure for the day. Dr. Nicholson, anything else that you would like to say before I close out today?
Thank everyone for joining today, and come see us in the ASC.
All right, thank you so much, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.